Were people stealing Studio Ghibli's art style? Why is Disney suing Midjourney? Was Mr. Beast going to use AI to steal thumbnails? Is your smart fridge a sleeper agent for our soon-to-be robot overlords? What the hell is going on? Is AI stealing everyone's intellectual property? Or is it the next revolutionary technology that we need to let thrive so we don't fall behind in the race for technological supremacy? Before we get into the topic of whether or not AI is theft, I'm going to briefly describe the history of AI to help contextualize how it works. Way back in the olden days of 1948, Alan Turing wrote a paper on machine intelligence. Then in 1950, he created the Turing test. This test would have a judge blindly communicate with a machine and a real person, and if they couldn't tell the difference, the machine was considered intelligent, which was pretty ambitious considering a shitty dollar store calculator has more processing power than the machines he was working with. John McCarthy would later coin the term artificial intelligence during the Dartmouth Conference, which established AI as a formal field of study in 1956. Then in 1957 and 58, psychologist and computer scientist Frank Rosenblatt developed the first neural network to learn from data. He called it perceptron because it was supposed to be based on human perception and was inspired by biological neurons. Perceptron would take a set of inputs, apply weights to each of them, then a bias that could shift decision-making similar to how B shifts the intercept in a linear function. The output is then compared to the actual label, or in other words, compared to real data, and if it's not within an acceptable range, the weights are adjusted incrementally at a set learning rate. This is more or less the basic way that all neural networks function at a fundamental level. They take inputs, generate a sort of average or sum from those inputs, compare the output to real data, then adjust parameters if necessary so that the outputs more closely resemble real data, or make accurate predictions for real data. In 1959, Arthur Samuel coined the term machine learning in a paper reflecting on his checkers game that could self-improve without having to be reprogrammed. In 1969, Dice, Marvin Minsky, and Seymour Papert criticized single-layer perceptrons. Single-layer neural networks can only handle problems that are linearly separable, so they couldn't handle comparisons like the exclusive OR. For long periods of time in the latter half of the 20th century, there was little enthusiasm and funding for AI research. These long periods of time between breakthroughs were referred to as the AI winters, but there were still some key advancements in the technology. In 1986, David Rumelhart, Jeffrey Hinton, and Ronald J. Williams, who had backgrounds in cognitive psychology and computer science, published a thesis that used backpropagation algorithms showcasing the utility of hidden layers and how weights and bias can be optimized through gradient-based corrections. While it wouldn't be until the 2000s that AI would start to really pick up steam again, this concept of backpropagation became the backbone of modern neural networks and laid the foundation for modern AI. Backpropagation is a process in which there is a forward pass which computes the output from the input by passing data through each neuron, which computes a weighted sum of its inputs using weight and bias, then using an activation function to decide what signal should pass forward, or whether or not the neuron should fire, and then storing the activations of every layer of the neural network. A loss calculation is then made by comparing the final output to the true label or correct output. Then a backward pass computes the gradient of loss with respect to each weight and bias by using the chain rule to trace how changes in every parameter affected the level of error. Parameters are then updated and this process is repeated using gradient descent to make small steps toward decreasing the calculated loss. Now skipping ahead to one of the modern controversies of AI, we have Ian Goodfellow and friends who developed generative adversarial networks in 2014. GANs uses a generator neural network that tries to generate data that looks real and a discriminator neural network that compares the output to real data. The reason that GANs was controversial is because it was the first deep learning architecture that was capable of making relatively realistic deepfakes, which stoked fear of mass misinformation in creepy corn. Yasha Soldikstein and his colleagues at Google Brain would then develop the diffusion architecture in 2015, a deep learning model that uses iterative denoising, or the process of gradually corrupting data by adding noise to learn how real data degrades. Then when generating data, it does this process in reverse. It starts with random noise and then step-by-step constructs an image based on the structures it learned from its training data. This would evolve into the latent diffusion model that uses compressed images to form an abstract representation of data, or latent space, rather than working directly with raw pixel values. This allows the generative process to function faster, with a greater focus on meaningful features and with significantly less noise. LDM is the reason that Midjourney's Stable Diffusion and DALL-E 2 all released in 2022 and started producing the first presentable AI-generated images. TLDR, to put it as simply as I can, artificial intelligence is a field of computer science devoted to replicating human intelligence. It takes data and then extrapolates patterns from that data in order to make predictions or outputs, and usually has some method of self-improvement. For this video, we'll be focusing on generative AI since it's at the center of most of the controversy. Generative AI is a branch of AI that is designed to create new content like text, images, audio, and video in a way that's intended to emulate human creativity. The controversies surrounding AI are pretty numerous, but I'm going to focus on a few of the big ones just to touch on the legal and public perception of AI. Have you ever seen these comics with the little bug-eyed gremlin girl? Well, these were made by the artist Sarah Anderson. Sarah and two other artists, Kelly McKernan and Carla Ortiz, spearheaded a lawsuit against Meta for allegedly using their art in Meta's AI training data. AI advocates rejoiced in victory after the judge dismissed this case. However, this is a pretty deceptive interpretation of what actually happened. You see, the judge dismissed Kelly and Carla because they never filed their works with the U.S. Copyright Office, which is required for pursuing copyright infringement claims in the U.S. courts. He also went as far as to comment that some of Meta's claims were nonsense, such as asserting that it was necessary for AI to have free access to copyrighted material in order to function. Unlike the other two primary plaintiffs, Sarah Anderson did register some of her works, and so her lawsuit is actually still moving forward as of the making of this video. Back in 2023, Getty Images sued Stability AI, the company that operates Stable Diffusion, because some of Stable Diffusion's outputs were displaying mangled Getty Images watermarks on their generated images. In June, Getty Images dropped the copyright infringement claims in the UK because of jurisdiction issues and a lack of evidence, but is still pursuing trademark-related charges and is still posing a separate lawsuit in the US for both copyright and trademark claims. Remember when everyone was posting those Ghibli-style images and a bunch of people got pissed off? Basically, AI services were being used to create memes and edit photos in the Studio Ghibli art style, which resulted in two posts going viral, the first being an, ironically, AI-generated cease and desist letter that was supposedly from Studio Ghibli. Studio Ghibli did not actually take any legal action against the AI companies or anyone distributing the AI content, just to be clear. The second viral post was of Miyazaki's quotes stating his very strong negative feelings about AI. A lot of people felt it was wrong to scrape the internet for Ghibli content in order to generate the images, and that it was disrespectful to the creator. While on the other side, proponents were pointing out that art styles aren't generally copyrightable on their own. MrBeast, the biggest YouTuber of all time, promoted a service that would use AI to copy the style of thumbnails from many prolific channels. This sparked backlash as many people felt that this was stealing art and taking work from channel artists. MrBeast said he wanted to make clickable thumbnails more accessible with this service that would cost $80. Which is hilarious because I generated this thumbnail for free, and it generated this unholy fusion of MrBeast and Linus Tech Tips. I mean, I know that the style is more personalized and you can insert your own face, so it's not really a one-to-one comparison, but still, it seems kind of pricey to me. Not that it matters, since MrBeast ended up pulling the service, deleting his promotion, and replacing it with a directory of real thumbnail artists instead. SAG-AFTRA filed a lawsuit against Llama Productions, a subsidiary of Epic Games that handles stuff like voice work for the game Fortnite, because they used an AI to emulate the late James Earl Jones' voice for an in-game Darth Vader character that could interact with players in real time. Many feel that since James Earl Jones consented to the use of his voice after his passing, that this should have been permissible, and no individual voice actor could realistically do what this AI was doing, seeing as it could interact with players in many different matches at once. But SAG-AFTRA argues that the move replaced union-covered work and violated the union's right to bargain over AI use. Players were also able to coax the iconic character into saying profanities and slurs, which pissed off the current owners of the character, Disney. While Disney didn't sue Fortnite, they tend to be pretty draconic when protecting their intellectual property, and it's possible this controversy was one of the factors that led to Disney's recent campaign against unauthorized AI replication of their characters. Speaking of which, Disney and Universal are suing Midjourney over the use of their characters. Basically, Midjourney can create perfect replicas of their characters in many different scenarios and settings. Disney and Universal believe that the AI scraped the internet for their copyrighted content without permission and are distributing their characters both without permission and sometimes in ways that they don't want their intellectual property to be used. Kind of like Darth Vader saying the N-word. The big tech platforms like YouTube and Facebook added clauses to their terms of service that forced users to allow all content they post on their platforms to be available as training data for their AI. They were able to make these changes because their terms of service already included clauses that they can change the TOS whenever they want without requiring subsequent agreements from their users. Well, a lot of people weren't happy. It's not like most people are going to completely delete their profiles that they spent years building on the objectively most effective platforms, or that are their primary method of communication, so ultimately most people just remained on these platforms despite many not liking the change. So what conclusions can we draw from all these controversies? Is AI theft? So to start off, technically speaking, theft deprives the owner of their property, so by legal definition, AI isn't literally stealing anything. The real question should be, is AI copyright infringement? Copyright infringement occurs when someone uses, reproduces, distributes, performs, publicly displays, or creates derivative works from copyrighted material without the original owner's permission. To answer whether or not it's infringement, we have to look at both input and output and how the legal system is currently interpreting these issues. As mentioned before, Sarah Anderson still has an ongoing case on whether the use of her copyrighted material in training data data counts as infringement. But another case, Bartz vs. Anthropic, recently received a split ruling where the judge described the use of copyrighted books as being spectacularly transformative. Now, he did find Anthropic is infringing due to having a massive library of pirated books, but decided that using copyrighted books was fair use for AI training. The Authors Guild feels that Judge Alsup's ruling here misinterprets the legal definition of transformative and are expected to appeal. So we'll see if this ruling sets a precedent, gets overturned, or if there's some weird division where different mediums of copyrighted material or different jurisdictions are treated differently by copyright laws. Disney and Universal's case makes this whole fiasco a little more interesting because it's easy to imagine that individual artists might not understand how to properly present a legal case, but these industry titans definitely have a plan. While the case is more focused on the outputs of Midjourney's AI, they also cited the fact that the AI was trained on copyrighted content as part of their charges. I don't think that Disney and Universal would press these charges if they didn't have a decent legal case in mind, so I'm interested to see where this goes. Now I'm going to get into my opinions on what the legality of generative AI should be based on my understanding of the law and how AI functions. Disclaimer, I'm not a legal expert, my degree is in computer science, but I'm not an expert on AI specifically by any means, so my words certainly aren't word of law, but the amount of research I did going into this video, I think I can make an at least somewhat coherent argument. So I want to start by going back to the Getty Images case against Stability, because it's a good example of input data appearing in the output. It would be pretty ridiculous to assert that this clear replication of their watermark is creative or new, as AI companies assert that their outputs are. This shows that fragments of copyrighted content within the data sets can still exist in the outputs. While it might not be the case that every output shows an obvious piece of copyrighted material, the fact that the AI is capable of outputting those images at all proves that the visual data does still exist in the AI model itself. If the extrapolated patterns that were quote-unquote learned by the AI still heavily resemble the input content, then it's irrational to assume that it doesn't contain that content. If I alter visual data with a brush in a drawing application, that brush is enacting an algorithm on the data and changes it so it's not an exact copy anymore, but it doesn't just instantly erase the copyright just because it isn't an exact copy. The AI itself is a product that is being distributed and contains copyrighted material. It doesn't matter that the data is fragmented, because even if you alter the original content to the point in which it's unrecognizable, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's fair use. For one, fragments of recognizable copyrighted content frequently do appear in AI outputs, and two, being recognizable on a surface level is only one factor that's considered in judging whether a derivative work is fair use. I have to say that I agree with the Authors Guild criticism of Judge Alsup's ruling in the Bartz vs. Anthropic case. Transformative doesn't literally mean that something was just apparently transformed. For a derivative work to be transformative, it has to change the meaning or purpose. Parody, satire, critique, commentary, research, and utility are examples of fair use transformation, and there's a through line in all of those examples in that they all require some form of intent that's separate from the intent of the original work. AI has no inherent intent. The intent is simply to provide the output, which is functionally the same intent as the original works. The prompter may have a transformative intent, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be the case, and if it isn't, both parties should be liable for infringement. For instance, that Starbucks logo that I asked Copilot to generate definitely should be copyright infringement, if I wasn't using it as an example for educational purposes, because it's clearly and very recognizably copyrighted content, and both myself and Copilot were responsible for its distribution. Copilot created it and distributed it to me, and then I distributed it to all of you. I had the intent to use it to educate, but as you can see by my prompt, Copilot did not. Copilot's intent was simply to provide me with an image that looked like the Starbucks logo, which is the exact same intent as the Starbucks logo itself. If I had provided the exact same prompt to a real artist as a commission or request and they came out with something similar, legal precedent suggests we would both be guilty of copyright infringement. It hardly makes sense to give more rights to the AI than to a real person. And this is where I'd like to make an important statement. There's no such thing as an AI artist. It's extremely clear that prompting an AI is far more similar to commissioning or requesting content than it is to creating it yourself. There's a very common line of propaganda that AI companies like to spout in the phrase, AI is a useful tool. AI is extremely useful, but it's not a tool. AI is very clearly a service. You request something, then it's created by an external party and provided to you. That's not creation, that's commission. AI is not a tool, AI is a service, and there's no such thing as a prompt engineer either. It doesn't matter how well you prompt, because frankly you could give a more detailed description to an actual artist as well. No amount of describing what you want is creating the product you are receiving. The AI is creating it. It is a product of the company that operates that AI, and that product should be held to copyright standards. And no, AI is not fair use in the same way that a search engine is. Search engines provide a directory that's useful to both the public and arguably the content owners as well, while AI is taking copyrighted products and then using them in its own product. Google showing you a thumbnail doesn't necessarily compete with the image owner, and realistically, it actually benefits them. AI does compete with the original image owner. The service provided by a search engine is a directory to an image, while the service provided by an AI is an image, which is the same medium of content as the original product. Yes, generating content provides a general utility to the public, but a service that just straight up gives copyrighted content to people would also be useful in basically the same way. So if that's your logic, then why do we even bother having copyright laws? But getting back to the main point, it also doesn't matter that you can't see the visual data while it's latent within the AI. If I distributed flash drives full of copyrighted content, it doesn't matter that you can't directly consume the visual data. That's still copyright infringement. So it makes absolutely no sense to assert that the nebulous data being handled by an AI data center is any different. To reiterate, if the AI can replicate copyrighted content, then it does contain the visual data of that content, and the AI model itself is a product that's being distributed. That's very obvious copyright infringement. And to the people complaining that human artists also steal art, yes, they do. Stuff like fan art and tracing images often is copyright infringement, and sometimes copyright holders successfully take that kind of content down. The only reason it's not common is because of the Streisand effect. If you tell people they can't do something and it's really easy to do, they're just gonna do it more. Which is also why it's important that attention is focused on AI companies and not on random people posting AI content. Going back to the Ghibli controversy, you can see how posting AI content is easy, but actually creating it is a highly centralized and resource-intensive operation. So keep in mind that harassing people is probably only going to make them post more AI content, and that the focus should be on putting pressure on AI companies to reduce unethical application of AI. Circling back to the argument that humans steal art or that all art is a derivative, yes, sure, if you want to be pedantic, you could say that human minds process data and sort of come to general conclusions based on a collection of experiences, which is in a broad sense similar to what AI does. But just because AI can learn doesn't mean it's an exact analogy to how humans learn. And even if it was, that doesn't mean that AI gets human rights. Rights aren't provided based on the ability to learn. The association with human learning is a complete red herring. It's not relevant. Rights are rooted in the capacity to suffer and the self-interest of being human. Copyrights are designed to protect creators, not protect AI from consequences. AI is an automated service that clearly commits copyright infringement. It shouldn't matter how advanced it is. Even if it had full consciousness, which it doesn't, it's still a product that a company created. I do also recognize that AI is a lot less likely to reproduce recognizable copyrighted content now than it was a few years ago because it's rapidly improving. But just because it's gotten better at hiding it doesn't mean it's not still an amalgamation of copyrighted content in many cases. So is AI theft? Technically no, but in the way that people commonly use the word theft, yes. It very clearly is infringing on a massive amount of intellectual property. Honestly, the fact that it opened by spitting out mangled watermarks and we're still even having this debate is baffling to me. Like, yes, it's obviously taking and repackaging content. Frankly, as far as I can tell, the argument that AI is fair use seems completely untenable. It massively contradicts legal precedent, the word of law, and common sense. I mean, look at this shit, dude. It knows it's not supposed to steal this stuff, so it ignored my first prompt, and then it just straight up added a very recognizable logo after some very mild tweaking of my prompt. I do want to take a step back now and say that not all generative AI models are built off of copyrighted content, but most of the big ones are. Platforms like Meta and YouTube just steal content directly from their own users, many of which likely would have opted out if they were given a realistic choice. And before the terms of service bullshit that big platforms are trying to pull now, a lot of data sets were scraped from the internet without consent. AI is a very powerful technology, and while I do think there are some overall problems when it comes to energy consumption, I don't expect AI to go anywhere. AI is being used to advance agriculture, predict the function of synthetic proteins, revolutionizing drug development, helping doctors with clerical work which frees them up to treat more patients, improving cancer detection. There's so many ways that AI has been beneficial, and while I think we might want to pump the brakes on replacing people with AI and implement it more slowly so that society has more time to adapt, I fully recognize that overall we're better off with this groundbreaking technology than without it. But that said, when it comes to the arts, I think AI should be playing a very minimal role, if any at all, because art isn't a productive industry. We don't need art. Art is just human expression. It serves no other purpose. Why are we trying to automate human expression? There's plenty of public domain content and consenting contributors to AI for it to function without just taking people's data without consent. And research and education are already often considered fair use. So it's not like we can't have common sense copyright laws being applicable to AI without also being able to benefit from AI's contributions to science and engineering. We can have functional AI without destroying the arts. I don't think that real art is going to be completely erased by generative AI, even if we don't get common sense regulations. After all, it's not like photography completely replaced realistic art. Plenty of people still draw and paint realistic art despite it no longer being necessary, because people like the novelty of skill. But there are a lot of consequences of AI that just fundamentally reduce the value of art in general. Large corporations seem like they're foaming at the mouth to abuse AI when it cuts costs for them, but when it infringes on their intellectual property, they start to see the problems with AI. I'm not surprised that cutting expenses by reducing the number of employees is appealing to these companies, but I am surprised that it took them this long to realize how bad AI is for them as well. If people can just steal entertainment products for free, or for much cheaper using AI, then that dramatically reduces the demand for Disney or other entertainment companies. I think we're going to see some platforms moving away from AI for one simple reason. They can't handle the massive influx of content making their servers more expensive to operate while not actually bringing in new users. I remember browsing an art website and seeing that the AI tag had about 1.5 billion entries despite the fact that AI only started getting good around 3 years ago. Then I saw another really common tag that probably existed for over a decade only had a little over 2 billion. When I stopped to think about the fact that AI content was also contributing to the other tag, I realized how crazy the volume of AI content has become. And when you consider how controversial AI is, it's not unreasonable to think that traffic from real users might have actually dropped, meaning revenue is decreasing while expenses are increasing. A flood of low-effort AI content is definitely something that's going to be extremely resource-intensive in the future if it isn't already. And no, I don't think the result of AI is going to be greater accessibility for upstart creatives that have been held back by a lack of resources. I mean, there might be some exceptions, but the reality is that the creator economy can only support so many quote-unquote jobs in internet entertainment, and it's already heavily oversaturated. What's actually going to happen is the already very low bar for actual merit in terms of creative talent is going to drop even lower. Talent will be rewarded less because randoms will be inundating the internet with low-effort brain rot, making everything less valuable. In fact, this is already largely happening. People are stealing footage and then using AI voiceovers to parasite off of other people's work. Content mills and low-effort nonsense slipping into success was already a problem before, but AI is exacerbating this issue. And I haven't even gotten into deepfakes and misinformation yet. AI can copy voices, faces, and pretty much anything from a real person. So naturally, fake websites, phishing, and other types of scams have become far more difficult to spot. And generated videos could potentially spread massive amounts of misinformation to benefit political or really any type of malicious agenda. It's already getting to the point where AI videos and audio are difficult to differentiate from the real thing, and images are pretty much already at that point. If AI companies can't regulate their product to prevent these extremely dangerous exploits, then their product shouldn't be available to the general public. I think that some judges and lawmakers are reluctant to regulate AI because they don't want to stunt the development of a new technology and have the US fall behind, which is valid to some extent, but the fact that AI companies have already invested billions of dollars into their services is not an excuse for the law to capitulate to AI. AI can be just as dangerous as it is productive. Granted, we do have some good laws against deepfakes like the Deepfake Accountability Act and the established precedent that purely AI-generated content isn't copyrightable, which gives some level of incentive to continue having at least some real artists working on projects, but again, I would like to also see the common sense implementation of copyright laws to stop the blatant abuse of people's data and intellectual property. Even in cases where artists provide consent, I think there are still some problems. Like, I get that James Earl Jones consented to having his likeness copied by AI, but just think of what will happen when companies eventually have a lexicon of distinctive voices. Like, what if Tom Kenny, Tara Strong, Mel Blanc, the old guys from Funimation who voiced almost all of the English anime dubs, and some other prolific voice actors with a lot of range consented to their voices being used before they passed away, and then the incentive to hire new talent was drowned out by the voices of the dead? That doesn't sound like fair business practice to me. And a state indefinitely profiting from the work of someone who's no longer with us is just another form of nepotism. You didn't create the value, so your ability to profit from it should be limited. The ability to track and identify AI-generated content is going to be a necessity for combating misinformation, cheating in education, and the integrity of the arts. I think that one way we could do this is by updating file formats to include a sort of AI signature, or a read-only field of metadata containing an encoded sequence that adds traceable accountability by identifying a piece of content as being AI-generated and indicating which AI-generated it. Or alternatively, maybe AI content could have something similar to a visible watermark overlay in images and videos, or inaudible audio data as an identifier for audio files. I also think that AI companies should log generated content in some way so that there's some record of what was generated and who generated it. Regardless of the solution, I think it's imperative that we make it possible to tell the difference between real content and AI-generated content. Because despite all the coping that AI will never replace real human quality content, we need to understand that literally anything can be extrapolated as data. I mean, think about it. There isn't a little band playing in your headphones or a window into another place in time when you watch a video. That's all data. Everything you consume through digital means is pure data. And one last thing I want to touch on. I know a lot of popular science communicators are very enthusiastic about AI and only seem to consider the scientific advancement aspect of the topic. To that I want to say, the reason why people weren't mad about AI beating games, but are mad about it generating creative content, isn't just because they're the ones being replaced, it's also because generative AI is largely built on stolen content. Let me rephrase this in a way that that will hopefully reach some of the nerds with sci-fi boners that don't seem to get the gravity of the situation. You know what would advance the field of medicine very rapidly? Unlimited human experimentation. There is often an unethical path that would likely increase the rate in which science advances, but we choose to preserve humanity because ethics matter and because we're human, so it's in our best interest. But that doesn't mean that human interests are valued by default. We've historically had to fight for humane treatment. A lot of science communicators really like environmentalism, so consider this. Both eco-conscious technology and the industrializing technologies that caused a lot of the environmental damage we see today were scientific advancements. When left in the hands of large corporations, the general public was frequently lied to at the expense of their health and future for the sake of corporate profits. DuPont knew that PFAS were harmful decades before it was revealed to the public. Asbestos and tobacco companies hid their deleterious effects and suppressed scientific research for years. Tobacco is a drug. Asbestos is an extremely useful material in many ways. If we weren't concerned with people's well-being, then we could increase productivity in a lot of ways with many products and in many different industries. That doesn't mean we should just focus on productivity and not consider the potential harm of a technology. AI is in that same phase where productive technology also has a lot of potential to harm people, and we need to be proactive in making sure it's implemented ethically. I think it's cute to hear shit like, I have faith that the benefits will outweigh the drawbacks. No, you need to pull your head out of your ass and have an actual stance, because that only happens when people take action. Look, I'm not anti-AI. I used AI extensively in the making of this video. I didn't use it for the creative process of writing the script, but I did use it for the productive process of directing me to research for this video. I've already said it a few times, but research is already fair use. It's not necessary for AI to have to steal IP to function. It's not. Just because it doesn't necessarily affect you or you're ambivalent about it, doesn't mean that it's right to take someone else's product and use it in your own product without permission. This is clearly bullshit. Let's not straddle the fence about it. Well, that's all I have to say on this subject. I don't really want to make a whole lot of controversial content on this channel. I made this channel mostly just to have fun with anime and video games and other nerdy shit that I'm into. But I do feel pretty strongly about how AI is currently being implemented, and I felt like it was important to at least try to weigh in on it. If anyone watches this, I hope that my insights were interesting and something to think about.